The Art of a War by Sun Tzu. Introduction. Sun Tzu in his book Shu Ma Chen gives the following biography of Sun Tzu. Sun Tzu Wu is a native of the Qi state. His art of war brought him to the notice of Ho Lu, king of Wu. Ho Lu said to him, "I have carefully perused your 13 chapters. May I submit your theory of managing soldiers to a slight test?" Sun Tzu replied, "You may." Ho Lu asked, "May the test be applied to women?" The answer was again in the affirmative, so arrangements were made to bring 180 ladies out of the palace. Sun Tzu divided them into 2 companies, and placed one of the king's favorite concubines at the head of each. He then bade them all take spears in their hands, and address them thus. "I presume you know the difference between front and back, right hand and left hand?" The girls replied, "Yes." Again the girls assented. The words of command having been thus explained, he set up the halberds and battle axes in order to begin the drill. Then, to the sound of drums, he gave the order, "Right turn." But the girls only burst out laughing. Sun Tzu said, "If words of command are not clear and distinct, if orders are not thoroughly understood, then the general is to blame." So he started drilling them again, and this time gave the order, "Left turn," whereupon the girls once more burst into fits of laughter. Sun Tzu. If words of command are not clear and distinct, if orders are not thoroughly understood, the general is to blame. But if his orders are clear, and the soldiers nevertheless disobey, then it is the fault of their officers. So saying, he ordered the leaders of the 2 companies to be beheaded. Now the king of Wu was watching the scene from the top of a raised pavilion, and when he saw that his favorite concubines were about to be executed, he was greatly alarmed and hurriedly sent down the following message. "We are now quite satisfied as to our general's ability to handle troops. If we are bereft of these 2 concubines, our meat and drink will lose their savor. It is our wish that they shall not be beheaded." Sun Tzu replied, "Having once received His Majesty's commission to be the general of his forces, there are certain commands of His Majesty which, acting in that capacity, I am unable to accept." Accordingly, he had the 2 leaders beheaded, and straightway installed the pair next in order as leaders in their place. When this had been done, the drum was sounded for the drill once more, and the girls went through all the evolutions, turning to the right or to the left, marching ahead or wheeling back, kneeling or standing, with perfect accuracy and precision, not venturing to utter a sound. Then Sun Tzu sent a messenger to the king saying, "Your soldiers, sire, are now properly drilled and disciplined, and ready for your Majesty's inspection. They can be put to any use that their sovereign may desire. Bid them go through fire and water, and they will not disobey." But the king replied, "Let our general cease drilling and return to camp. As for us, we have no wish to come down and inspect the troops." Thereupon Sun Tzu said, "The king is only fond of words, and cannot translate them into deeds." After that, Ho Lu saw that Sun Tzu was one who knew how to handle an army, and finally appointed him general. In the west, he defeated the Chu state and forced his way into Ying, the capital. To the north he put fear into the states of Qi and Qin, and spread his fame abroad amongst the feudal princes. And Sun Tzu shared in the might of the king. About Sun Tzu himself, this is all that Shu Ma Chen has to tell us in this chapter. But he proceeds to give a biography of his descendant, Sun Pin, born about 100 years after his famous ancestor's death, and also the outstanding military genius of his time. The historian speaks of him too as Sun Tzu, and in his preface we read, "Sun Tzu had his feet cut off and yet continued to discuss the art of war." It seems likely, then, that Pin was a nickname bestowed on him after his mutilation, unless the story was invented in order to account for the name. The crowning incident of his career, the crushing defeat of his treacherous rival Pang Chuan, will be found briefly related in chapter 19. To return to the elder Sun Tzu. He is mentioned in 2 other passages of the Shi Qi. In the 3rd year of his reign, 512 BC, Ho Lu, king of Wu, took the field with Zhu Shu and Po Pei, and attacked Chu. He captured the town of Shu and slew the 2 princes' sons who had formerly been generals of Wu. He was then meditating a descent on Ying, the capital, but the general Sun Wu said, "The army is exhausted. It is not yet possible. We must wait." After further successful fighting, in the 9th year, 506 BC, King Ho Lu addressed Wu Zhu Shu and Sun Wu, saying, "Formerly, you declared that it was not yet possible for us to enter Ying. Is the time ripe now?" The two men replied. Chu's general Zhu Chang is grasping and covetous, and the princes of Tang and Tsai both have a grudge against him. If your majesty has resolved to make a grand attack, you must win over Tang and Tsai, and then you may succeed. Holu followed this advice, beat Chu in 5 pitched battles and marched into Ying. This is the latest date at which anything is recorded of Sun Wu. He does not appear to have survived his patron, who died from the effects of a wound in 496. In another chapter there occurs this passage. From this time onward, a number of famous soldiers arose, one after the other: Cao Fan, who was employed by the Qin state; Wang Zhu, in the service of Qi; and Sun Wu, in the service of Wu. These men developed and threw light upon the principles of war. It is obvious enough that Xu Maqian at least had no doubt about the reality of Sun Wu as an historical personage, and with one exception, to be noticed presently, he is by far the most important authority on the period in question. It will not be necessary, therefore, to say much of such a work as the Wu Yu Chun Chu, which is supposed to have been written by Zhao Ye of the 1st century AD. The attribution is somewhat doubtful, but even if it were otherwise, his account would be of little value, based as it is on the Shi Qi and expanded with romantic details. The story of Sun Tzu will be found, for what it is worth, in Chapter 2. The only new points in it worth noting are: 1. Sun Tzu was first recommended to Holu by Wu Zhu. 2. He is called a native of Wu. 3. He had previously lived a retired life, and his contemporaries were unaware of his ability. The following passage occurs in the Huainan Zhu. When sovereign and ministers show perversity of mind, it is impossible even for a Sun Tzu to encounter the foe. Assuming that this work is genuine, and hitherto no doubt has been cast upon it, we have here the earliest direct reference for Sun Tzu, for Huainan Zhu died in 122 BC, many years before the Shi Qi was given to the world. Liu Shang, 80-9 BC, says, "The reason why Sun Tzu at the head of 30,000 men beat Chu with 200,000 is that the latter were undisciplined." Tang Mingxi informs us that the surname Sun was bestowed on Sun Wu's grandfather by Duke Qing of Qi, 547-490 BC. Sun Wu's father Sun Ping rose to be a minister of state in Qi, and Sun Wu himself, whose style was Chang Qing, fled to Wu on account of the rebellion which was being fomented by the kindred of Tian Pao. He had 3 sons, of whom the second, named Ming, was the father of Sun Pin. According to this account then, Pin was the grandson of Wu, which, considering that Sun Pin's victory over Wei was gained in 341 BC, may be dismissed as chronologically impossible. Whence these data were obtained by Tang Mingxi I do not know, but of course no reliance whatever can be placed in them. An interesting document which has survived from the close of the Han period is the short preface written by the great Cao Cao, or Wei Wu Ti, for his edition of Sun Tzu. I shall give it in full. I have heard that the ancients used bows and arrows to their advantage. The Lun Yu says, there must be a sufficiency of military strength. The Shu Qing mentions the army among the 8 objects of government. The I Ching says, army indicates firmness and justice, the experienced leader will have good fortune. The Shi Qing says, the king rose majestic in his wrath, and he marshaled his troops. The Yellow Emperor, Tang the Completer and Wu Wang all used spears and battle axes in order to succor their generation. The Shu Ma Fa says, if one man slay another of set purpose, he himself may rightfully be slain. He who relies solely on warlike measures shall be exterminated, he who relies solely on peaceful measures shall perish. Instances of this are Fu Chai on the one hand and Yan Wang on the other. In military matters, the sage's rule is normally to keep the peace, and to move his forces only when occasion requires. He will not use armed force unless driven to it by necessity. Many books have I read on the subject of war and fighting, but the work composed by Sun Wu is the profoundest of them all. Sun Tzu was a native of the Qi state, his personal name was Wu. He wrote The Art of War in 13 chapters for Holu, king of Wu. Its principles were tested on women, and he was subsequently made a general. He led an army westwards, crushed the Chu state and entered Ying the capital. In the north, he kept Qi and Qin in awe. 100 years and more after his time, Sun Pin lived. He was a descendant of Wu. In his treatment of deliberation and planning, the importance of rapidity in taking the field, clearness of conception, and depth of design, Sun Tzu stands beyond the reach of carping criticism. My contemporaries, however, have failed to grasp the full meaning of his instructions, and while putting into practice the smaller details in which his work abounds, they have overlooked its essential purport. That is the motive which has led me to outline a rough explanation of the whole.